And I will stop sharing my screen here so you can see me and continue admitting people.
I can admit people while you're talking.
Thank you, Scott. I want to welcome you all to the League's first virtual colleague circles. As many of you know, we have had these colleague circles as essentially affinity groups in the past, meetings for people to talk about things related to, say, collections or small museums, education, these sorts of things. And the situation we find ourselves in now with many in-person programs canceled seemed a perfect opportunity to revitalize our colleague circles sort of in virtual form and perhaps reduce the barriers of actually getting to them if we have them virtually. So I want to welcome you all to the first instantiation of this. We're kicking off these colleague circles. The idea is to have them on alternate Fridays at noon on Zoom. They're free with your RSVP. And I just wanted to let you know about the next two that are coming up. On June 5th, at this time, we'll be having a conversation about collecting COVID-19 in Connecticut and elsewhere. And we have a couple of guests from institutions in Connecticut, as well as someone from the National Museum of American History talking about the efforts that they've been engaged in to document this historic moment that we're engaged in as well. So this would be a great time to talk about any efforts that you have going on at your own institutions to document the pandemic. And on June 19th, we'll be talking about digital and remote internships, something that we're probably all thinking about at this moment in time as the summer fast approaches. And we'll have with us Dr. Leah Glazer, who runs the public history program at Central Connecticut State University and is a professor of history there. So that'll be a good opportunity to think a little bit about what you're thinking about for engaging interns in a period of social distancing. Just a couple of more announcements before we get started. As hopefully those of you who are CLHO members know, our annual business meeting is coming up on June 1st at 4 p.m. This will also happen over Zoom. If you haven't signed up yet, I'd really encourage you to. We have a fabulous Zoom door prize, but you have to show up to claim it. By RSVPing, you'll be entered to win a copy of Walt Woodward's new book. In order to claim your prize, and we'll be doing the drawing at the end of the meeting. You have to show up to the meeting. You can't just RSVP and get the book. So that'll be on June 1st at 4. And the last thing I just wanted to share with you all, as many of you know, because of the situation we find ourselves in, we have been forced to cancel our in-person annual conference this year. However, we've decided to basically port much of the content from the annual conference to a new venue that we're calling CLHO Summer School. So this will be a series of webinars that will happen starting June 10th on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. The schedule we're still finalizing right now, but we'll basically be bringing you the content of the conference over the course of the entire summer for the low price of $5 a webinar. And we are really excited to launch this new opportunity for all of you and have more chances to connect with each other in addition to the colleague circles. So those are the announcements that I have from the League. I just wanted to say, for those of you who may be new to Zoom, just a couple of things before we get started. I'm going to hand things over to Jason and Scott, who are going to talk about the CARES funding from Connecticut Humanities. But before I do that, I just wanted to invite everyone who's logged in on it looks like everybody's come in on computer at this point, so we don't have to worry about phone participants, but feel free if you are new to Zoom, if you move your mouse around, you'll see there's a list of participants that you can see. There's a chat feature that if you click on that in the bottom portion of your screen, it will bring up a little box and you can say hello to everyone here. So I invite you to, introduce yourselves to one another in the chat if you would like. And if you have resources to share where other people are talking, the chat is a good way to do that. I'll be monitoring the chat, so if you have questions while Scott is giving his presentation, please feel free to include those in the chat, and I'll queue those up for Scott and Jason to address after they've finished talking. I think it's great if you can introduce yourself. We'll have an opportunity for more in-person Q&A at the end when we can unmute everyone again. If you do speak later on, please introduce yourself before speaking, and do keep your questions brief. I think that's all I have. At this point, I want to hand it over to Jason Mancini, who is the Executive Director of Connecticut Humanities, who's just going to say a few words about the CARES funding from the NEH.
Hi, everyone. I see some familiar faces, and many of you have not met, so I look forward to the day where we can have a meeting in person. We're really happy to be able to offer this funding. Scott will certainly talk a bit more, but just to give you a sense of where we're going with Connecticut Humanities, we're in the midst of our strategic planning process, and I think this is a good opportunity to mention to all of you that moving forward, we will be redirecting much of our funding opportunities towards COVID-related relief. So please pay attention to our website and other announcements, as this funding is very dynamic during this time period. As I mentioned, Scott will have more information, but in our own strategic planning process, we're very mindful of the impact of COVID and the role that we play in Connecticut. And while we'll continue to strengthen our grant program, we are also going to be enhancing our digital platforms, our support around advocacy initiatives. So please pay attention to that, how we can really gain support from our legislators and community leaders. And then also we're going to be focusing on capacity building. So while we had hoped to have a new STEPS program this year, we recognize a more urgent need, and we'll be supporting other types of capacity building for right now. And then hopefully as life reemerges in a post-COVID world, hopefully soon, we will be shifting our attention to another STEPS class. And again, Scott can provide more information on that. But we're, as organizations and as partners, Connecticut Humanities and the Connecticut League of History organizations are here to support all of you and offer all of the guidance we can during these challenging times. So thanks all for participating, and we'll look forward to connecting again in the future.
Great, thanks, Jason. Scott, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank Jason for that introduction, but I also especially want to thank Amherst and the Connecticut League, who are our great partners, for hosting this Zoom meeting and giving us the opportunity to connect with you all. As Jason said, lots of familiar faces here. I'm really happy to see you all and get a peek into your Zoom backgrounds, I guess. I look forward to the day when we can get together in person. I think one of the last normal things that we did was a coffee talk with the Connecticut League at Rocky Hill Historical Society right before the whole world turned on us. And it was kind of a last great way to see so many people and talk right before the things changed. And really that's what I wanted to have the opportunity to talk to you all about, is we've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, as Jason said, to shift our granting program, take our existing grants and make them more accessible and helpful to you all at this time, but also to roll out some new granting through the National Endowment for the Humanities and the first CARES Act. We received $483,000 of federal relief support, $450,000 of which is going to go back out into competitive grants, and that's going to be the first part of what we talk about. Another $20,000 of that is going to the Connecticut League to help them roll out a lot of the programs that Amherst was talking about to help you all with your COVID related concerns and needs and trainings that you all have to do the best job you can to safely open up your institutions and figure out how to pivot your programming to meet your community needs at this time. So there's a beginning of a conversation today, and many more conversations coming from us at Connecticut Humanities and from the Connecticut League, especially over the coming weeks and months. I do want to echo what Amherst said. If you all have questions, please do put them in the chat box. Amherst is going to be moderating that while I'm talking. I am not going to talk for the next 48 minutes of time. I'm going to leave time for questions and answers at the end, and we'll start off by answering those questions that came in the chat box during the presentation. I'm going to share my screen now, because a lot of what I want to do, I want to be able to show you where things are so that you don't have to search around later on your own. So I'm going to go for my website here. And Amherst, hopefully everyone can see our Connecticut Humanities website right now. And this is where I want us to start off. A lot of the things that we're going to be talking about and a lot of the answers to your questions can be found right on CTHumanities.org. The first thing I want to say is, if you are not already getting our communications, and I hope that many, if not all of you are, you can sign up for our e-newsletter. We actually had a wonderful new e-newsletter that went out this morning. You can go to Info Hub here on the top navigation and click e-news subscribe. And that is one way to make sure you're getting the latest and greatest updates about Connecticut Humanities, but specifically about our granting program. The League has their own e-newsletter. I highly recommend, if you're not getting their updates, although I suspect many of you are as you're on the call today, to do that as well. Plus, follow us on social media. And if you go to the bottom of our homepage, you can find quick ways to connect with us on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram. Again, we're trying to share out the information in as many different ways as possible. And we encourage you to follow us in the ways that make most sense for you and in the ways you want to get information. All of our grants information lives under the menu for Our Work. You can see here as I hover over, the right side of Our Work has our links for grants program. We're going to talk about a number of these today. There's a direct link to our grants application portal. So that's one quick and easy way. There's several links we have, but that's one quick and easy way to remember how to get there. We've got information right off the top about our CARES Act Humanities grants, which we're going to talk about next. And then quick grants, which I want to talk about after the CARES Act grants. Our other grant lines you see here right now: capacity, project planning, project implementation. Those are grant lines that we typically run twice a year, first Friday of November and the first Friday of April. I'll talk more about this as we go on too. We're going to be suspending our November deadlines. As Jason was mentioned, we want to try to figure out the ways to pivot and use our support in all the different ways to best meet your needs. So we're going to be suspending our November deadline to reallocate those fundings that would normally go to capacity grants, planning grants, and implementation grants to more forms of COVID relief through our quick grants and through additional humanities relief grants after our first CARES Act funding runs out. But let's pivot and let's talk about that CARES Act relief grants. So if you're to click on that, you will get to our homepage where we're trying to tell you all the things that you need to know. And first and foremost, we want to make sure that we're acknowledging that this is funding that we received from the National Endowment for the Humanities through the CARES Act. And I've talked to other folks. This may be the first time that there's been a government relief bill like this that has had direct funding for the arts and the humanities and the culture sector and the library sector since the Great Depression. A lot of times there'll be funding that goes to small businesses, and many of our organizations can qualify for that small business fund, but there was direct funding that went to the National Endowment for the Humanities because they have state affiliates like us at Connecticut Humanities. There are federal formulas in place to distribute this money equitably based on population size, and we have the ability to turn this around to organizations that we know well all across the state. So we're very fortunate that that has happened. If you have communications with any of your legislators, it's always great to thank them for that. If you get grants from us through this grant line, that's going to be something that you're required to do, is to keep letting our legislators know how much we appreciate this funding that's coming to our sector. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to grant out a total of $450,000 through the CARES Act funding. And these will be grants that range from $2,500 to $15,000. The amount of funding will be dependent on your organization's budget size. We're trying to figure out a way to fairly and equitably distribute money to as many organizations as possible. Budget size seemed to be a great way for us to be able to do that. These are different grants. Most of you that know us and have applied for grants in the past are used to project-based grants. And those project-based grants had matching requirements, and they required you to submit a project budget. That is not the case for the CARES Act grants we're doing. These are relief grants. There is no match required. You do not need to submit a project budget and tell us at length on how every dollar is going to be spent. We are more looking to figure out what are the types of humanities activities your organization does in normal times, what's the negative impact been for COVID on your organization, and what are your thoughts and plans on continuing to meet your community's needs today and being sustainable and doing so into the future. We guarantee there's going to be at least 3 deadlines for these general operating support grants, and that's what they're for: salaries, rent, utilities. Again, you don't have to go down to the dollar of how you're going to spend them in advance, but we're trying to help you guys pay for the types of expenses that we know are harder when you're not doing public programs, open for the public with your normal open hours, having to cancel your fundraisers. We want you to be able to keep staff paid, not furlough staff, and that's the intent of this money, is to keep operations going as normal as possible for places that are hurting. We guarantee we'll have at least 3 rounds of reviews. All the grants that are submitted between when our grant line opened and June 1st will be in that first wave, and then we will have basically every 2 weeks, June 15th and July 1st, cutoffs after that. We will do award notifications roughly 2 weeks following a deadline. So those June 1st grants, you will know of your status by roughly the next deadline of June 15th. We're also going to be doing things a little bit differently here than we do. Normally, if you apply, you'll either be funded fully or partially or declined. If you are a project in an organization that is eligible, and it's just a matter of we ran out of money at the first review of these grants, we will carry you over to the next application review for consideration. You do not need to apply a second time or a third time. So I encourage everyone, if you can, to get your grants in sooner versus than later, because if you're in by June 1st and we, for whatever reason, do not fund you in that first wave of grant funding, you'll potentially be carried over to June 15th and July 1st, assuming you're an eligible organization. Speaking of eligibility, we are funding some things a little bit differently than we normally do. We are funding 501c3 nonprofits, as we always do, that have been in operation for at least a year and provide regular significant humanities programs to the public. That is not different, but we are also funding for the first time, because this is federal funding, Connecticut-based federally recognized tribes. So this is a new and exciting eligibility for us to be able to help out institutions such as the Mashantucket Pequot Museum, potentially, which have not been eligible for us before. On the opposite side, we are not having eligible, at least in this first go-round, municipalities, because in many cases those municipal-run organizations have funding that comes through the town in ways that our 501c3 nonprofits do not. This may change going forward, but for right now, for the first $450,000, you need to be either a federally recognized tribe or a 501c3 nonprofit. The NEH requires organizations to have a DUNS number. You do not need to have a DUNS number to be able to apply. If we make an award to you, you will need to have a DUNS number at that time. You can do that as early as today if you don't have one. It can take up to 2 days. You might get it immediately. It might take a couple business days. Should not take a long period of time. If you click on this link here for applying or looking for more information about your DUNS number, there will be a series of things there to just, first of all, check if your organization has a DUNS number. Many of you may be new to your organization, have never applied for federal funds in your time, but it could be something that your colleagues did many years ago. So the first thing I would say is, if you don't know if you have a DUNS number, check to see if you have one, because you may very well already have one. We have some links here on the left, and we'll talk more about these over the next couple of minutes. You can click to get to our full guidelines for the program. And as always, for us or for any other funder, that's the first thing I recommend, is read the guidelines. It will answer a lot of your questions. I'm happy to answer questions, but in many cases, the things that you're asking probably can be answered through the guidelines. We also can preview a copy of the application here. You can open it up. It's a PDF. You can print it out. You can see our application questions. You can talk about them with your colleagues before you start to fill out the application. And for all those applications, you will need to submit them using our online grants portal. And I will take us there and talk a little about that, how you can create a profile if you don't have one, how you can find your password if you forgot what that is. Want to go to a couple of things here. So if you click on the link for guidelines, you will come to this PDF, which will pop up in another window, and we'll talk about the guidelines. I think this is the shortest guidelines we've ever had. They're at 5 pages, and that's only because one of them is our title page here with a table of contents. This is to help organizations with hardships. And the hardships are not an exclusive list, but these are things like you have lost revenue. You have lost your venue or your workspace. You have had to lay off or furlough or reduce staff hours. You've been closing and reducing your hours of operation. You've been canceling fundraisers. These are the kind of things we want to know about and to help organizations with. We have our budget level amounts tied to the Connecticut League's membership levels. So for the smallest organizations, under 100,000, the maximum request will be $2,500. The next budget size up under 250,000 will be $5,000. Under 500,000 will be $10,000. And for organizations over $500,000, the maximum request is $15,000. Grants are to be for operating expenses and those other things that you need that we'll talk more about in a subsequent section here. We talked about eligibility. This is not for for-profits. These are not for individuals. These are not for municipalities at this time. Won't go over all the others. The one thing that we're not allowing in terms of double dipping is you cannot apply for and receive a relief grant through the CARES Act funds that the National Endowment for the Humanities got and sent to Connecticut Humanities, as well as the funding that the Office of the Arts got through the NEA. All other kind of relief programs, from PPP to Small Business Association loans, they will not jeopardize your ability to get funds through this grant line. We do have a question in the application that asks what other things you've applied for. We've got a disclaimer there that says this is not going to be used one way or the other to determine if you get an award. This is for reporting, so we can report back to the NEH how many organizations have been applying for different types of relief in Connecticut and beyond. Our funding priorities, these are going to align right to the questions you'll see. Talking about things like demonstrated financial hardship, hits that you took to your operations, your staff, and your revenue streams. What are those humanities activities that you normally do for the public? The open hours, the public tours, the school tours, the digital initiatives. What are your plans for continuing operations while we're still during this crisis? Your responsiveness to the changes that have happened in your community, and your thoughts on sustainability for after the crisis has passed. We really just want to get some insight into where you're thinking. How are you still trying to serve during this time? How are you hoping to make yourself be on the best footing going forward? We have a priority of geographic diversity. We want to try to get this funding out to as many corners of the state as possible. And we also are having a priority of organizations with budgets less than $500,000. Does that mean we will not fund organizations above $500,000? No, we will. But the first and foremost, we're trying to help some of those organizations that are on the smaller side, that don't have as many resources in terms of professional development staff, in terms of having the ability to go after all of the different forms of relief support that are out there. This might be the really only accessible form to many organizations. So we're making sure that everyone knows that our first priority is the smaller. But if you are a larger, please do apply. And I'll talk more about some of the ways we're going to continue to try to help beyond this $450,000 initial dollars as well. We're also giving preference to organizations that have applied to us over the last 5 years, and that's from 2015 to the present. Does this mean if you've applied to us in 2013 or 12 or never, that you're not going to get a grant? Again, no. I just wanted to know that that's another thing that we'll be taking into consideration is if you're an organization that's been coming to us for grants, whether you've received them or not in the more recent past. We talked about some of the eligible expenses. Again, you don't need to submit a budget, but we're looking for this money to be going towards staff salary, bringing on temporary staff, hiring of contractors, paying bills that have been piling up, mortgage or rent payments if you're an organization that doesn't own your own building, other costs related to safe reopenings for staff and the public, and we've intentionally left that vague. We want to make sure that you've got the tools and resources as we start to open the state back up to be able to keep your staff safe and to keep the public safe alike. If you have questions about anything that's not on this list, we can either talk about it on this webinar or you can email me afterwards, and I'm happy to talk about those things with you. Again, no match is required. We're looking for these funds to be spent 6 months, within 6 months of the grant being awarded, so we can close out this and report back to the NEH. There's a whole list of funding exclusions here. These are not new things. These are things that we are normally having as our funding exclusions. Things like we can't be funding organizations to take political stances, to use it for lobbying, to purchase land. One thing I want to point out here, besides you can't use it for purchase of food, you can't use it for retroactive funding for activities and expenses incurred before March 27th, 2020. So, as you'll know, we're past March 27th, but that was the date that the federal legislation went into effect. And if you have expenses and bills that have been coming since the pandemic started and since the first CARES Act was passed, anything after that date, March 27th on, are eligible to be used for these funds should you be awarded them. As I said, we'll have at least 3 deadlines of June 1st, 15th, and then July 1st. But this is a new thing for us, like I said. If we do not fund you in that first round of decisions for those June 1st grants, it's not an approve or decline. We will potentially hold your application if you are eligible and viable for future consideration, and we'll let you know. We will give you a call after that first review and let you know which bucket you fell into, that you were approved, declined, or you're being held over for the next deadline. Want to do a quick preview of the application. And again, you can get to that from the CARES Act page we were just on, but also at the end of the guidelines here, there's another link to preview the application or to go to our grants submission portal. And the last thing I'll say here from the guidelines, this should be quick. Hopefully those that are on the call and have applied found it to be so. If anyone finds it to be not quick, please let me know. We're estimating that this should take no more than 30 to 60 minutes to complete. And really within the first 3 hours of going live, we had applications being submitted to us. So I think we've achieved that goal. The application itself, you can see there's a part at the beginning, and this is a PDF of it. So this will be forms to fill out online, and we'll take a look at that too. But here's a PDF of the questions. There's some eligibility checkboxes here just to reaffirm to everyone that's filling this out that you need to be a 501c3 or a tribe, that you have had your status for a year, that you provide regular programming about the humanities to the public, that you're in compliance with previous CTH grants. If you have any questions about being in compliance, just let me know. There are very few organizations that are ineligible, and no one on this call today that I've seen fits into that category. You have to choose a project title. This is a little quirk of our system. It's the one required field that I can't get rid of, but you can say something like COVID relief for Shelton Historical Society. You don't have to give a crazy title or think up something hard. We have a narrative question right off the bat, and these are very short sections. It's 1,500 characters, not words. That ends up being somewhere in the neighborhood of a half a page or less of text. We want you to talk about those programs and services that you normally provide, humanities programs and services that you provide, such as open hours to the public for your historic house, the exhibits that you run, the programs you run, the school tours you run. We have 2 numeric fields. 1, what is your estimated actual financial loss to date from when the pandemic hit in mid-March to today, to the date that you're applying? What is your estimated losses going through Labor Day, through September 1st? And then there's a narrative block, another 1,500 characters where you can elaborate on that. And this is where you should be saying stuff like, we had to cancel our annual fundraiser that we always hold in May. It brings in normally 35% of our operating budget. We have no plans to reschedule at this time. And this is hurting us because it's a $25,000 of funding that we have no great way to get back these days. Talk about the fact that you've had to reduce staff hours, that you've furloughed staff members, that temporary contractors have had to suspend operations, that you're not doing school programs. Give us the specifics of the hardships that you're facing. Another 1,500 character block, talk about the way you've been continuing operations, the way you've been pivoting and responding, shifting things online, doing new things to meet community needs, and the plans and thoughts you have of continuing to be sustainable today, tomorrow, and into the future. And that's it. We have one more optional block here. You do not need to add anything there, but if you feel that there's some important things that we should be knowing about that we haven't already talked about, that's your space to let that be known to the committee. We have a place here that we again reiterate the maximum amount that can be requested. We ask you to enter how much funds that you will be requesting up to your max based on budget size. Upload your current year's operating budget. If you've got a revised budget due to COVID, feel free to upload that. If you've not revised your budget since the beginning of your fiscal year, that's fine. Just use the current operating budget that you're working with. And then, again, there's no project budget here because this is not a project grant. We ask you just to check the types of activities which you anticipate using relief funds on should you be awarded. This is going to help us with reporting that 85% of applicants said that they were going to use funding for staff salary. 35 said they would use it to pay utility bills. This is for reporting purposes. You are not held in stone to the boxes that you check here. If you selected other, we want to know what that other is. As I mentioned earlier, we have one question about what other sources of relief funds you've been applying for and or receiving. And as I say, other than the Office of the Arts CARES Act relief grants, which you cannot receive that and a Connecticut Humanities grant, all of these others are not going to be used to impact your application, but instead will be to help us with reporting back to the government. And that's it. The only other things we need are some of the names here. Authorizing signatory, that's if you get the grant, who would be the person that you'd be having sign the contract. Project director, who is the main point of contact about this grant with Connecticut Humanities. Fiscal agent, who is the person at your organization, many cases it's the treasurer, that's going to be responsible for managing the project's funds if the grant is awarded, the coming and going of grant funds and reporting back and signing off on the way that they were used. The fiscal agent and the project director need to be different people. And you're done. You can check a box, say that you certify that everything above is correct, and you can hit submit. We are not doing draft reviews of COVID grants, so this is a little bit different. But as opposed to project grants, where we can give you some advice on the best way to run your exhibit or public program, this is about you making the most successful case you can for your organization's struggles at this time, and that's not appropriate for us to help you strengthen your case. So this is something that we will not be reviewing and giving guidance on.
Scott, I don't know if now might be a good chance to field a few of the questions that have come in.
Yeah, let's do some questions about the CARES Act, and then we'll move on to our quick grants after that.
Great. So we first had a question about whether applying for one of the IMLS grants is something that kicks you out of consideration.
That is fine. You can apply for IMLS, NEH, NEA, SBA, PPP, any of the alphabet soups. The only thing that is not allowed, like I said, is Office of the Arts funding for their CARES Act grants. So for one example, SHPO just recently opened up some $1,000 grants to help you with your building. That is not a prohibition. You can apply for and get that hopefully, as well as this CARES Act funding.
Yeah. There's also a question about how you guys are going to be managing this sort of balance between organizational size in the review. There is some concern from some folks on the chat that maybe, you know, if those with larger budgets come in, they might deplete the funds sooner than smaller, and there wouldn't be enough left over for some smaller organizations. So how are you folks thinking about that in your process?
We have created a budget that will heavily weight the smallest organizations, going up towards fewer grants for the largest organizations. This was the budget that was put in place. If we are getting sufficient applications, and I hope we will, from the smallest to the 100 to 250,000 to the 250 to 500, the vast majority of these CARES Act funds are going to go out to the smallest of places. Okay. So that has been taken into consideration in the budgeting and the way we're doing this. We are going to be funding and serving the smallest organizations with priority. Okay. So I think it's the opposite fear is that we're not going to have enough funding for the largest guys. So our small organizations should feel good that this money has been earmarked for them first and foremost. For the largest organizations, know that if for whatever reason we cannot fund you through the first $450,000 of CARES Act, as I said earlier in the call, we've reallocated a good chunk of our 2021 state funds, which start July 1st, to do more relief grants. We are hopeful that there will be a second CARES-like act coming from the federal government with additional funds to add to this pot. And we also put in an application last week with a statewide organization that actually approached us. So we're hopeful it was a $1 million request. And we're hopeful that that will add a significant amount of resources over the coming weeks and months here to be able to fund as many of these applications as possible. But for those smaller organizations, you are our first priority.
Great. We also wanted to clarify that even if you apply for the IMLS CARES Act grants, you can still apply for this? That's still eligible?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So there was also a question, which I think was echoed by a couple of people on the chat, about whether expenses to upgrade technology in order to actually serve the communities remotely would qualify for this grant.
Yes.
That's great.
Yes. I think that the thing is, if you have to choose between using your own cash to pay for a staff member or using your own cash to pay for the technology, I think it would be great if we can shift some of these funds when you have a choice like that to paying for staff first and foremost. So we can talk about the amount of dollars that went to keeping people paid here in Connecticut. But yes, that is an eligible expense. That is fine to use your funding for upgrading the technology to be able to keep you open and running and serving the public.
Yeah. There's a question about the sorts of reporting that will be required for this grant.
We, at the end of this, will have a very simple final report that's going to go out. I'm thinking 1 or 2 questions at the most, trying to get some testimonials from organizations about how this helped you, because we want to be able to report that back to the NEH and back to our legislators. And we'll have a very simple form to talk about where the funding was spent. And it's not going to be our typical budget form. It might just be in a Word document to say, we had $5,000, we spent $4,000 of it on our curator's salary and $1,000 of it on our part-time bookkeeper's salary. Done. But we want to know where the funding went, and we want some testimonials and some quotes that we can go back and use for advocacy purposes.
Great. It sounds like the grants are, the decisions come within about 2 weeks. If someone's approved for the grant, how quickly might the funds arrive?
The timeline that I would estimate, if you apply by June 1st and you're awarded in that first round, like I said, it'll be deadline of June 1st. We will adjudicate the grant in week 2. You'll know about your decision by June 15th. We'll try to get contracts out within the next 5 to 7 business days. And I'm hoping that we can get a contract signed and back to us so that this funding is going out for the very first grants, if not by the end of June, by the very beginning of July, right around 4th of July. It probably will take about 10 to 14 days post-award to execute contracts, get this funding out to you, get contracts out to you, and get countersigned contracts back to us.
Good. Okay. Yeah, I think there was a question thinking also about the fiscal year and the timing of the funds arrival is on people's minds. Are there particular sources of income that you're sort of considering as an estimate of the loss of revenue due to COVID? Ticket sales, lost donations, do you have sort of is that up to the applicant, or do you have rules about that?
It's up to the applicant, but I think all the things that you mentioned, Amherst, are what we want you to do. So think big. Think about admission revenue you're not getting in, school tour revenue that you've lost, public program revenue that you've lost, fundraisers that you've not held, annual appeals that you've postponed. Any and all of those earned or contributed incomes or grants. If you're in the Hartford Foundation area and you would have normally applied to the Hartford Foundation for a programming grant that they're not entertaining right now because they've shifted all of their grant lines to COVID. Think big and include all of those sources of revenue that you would normally be getting that you've not because of the way the world has changed.
Okay. When submitting a budget, one of the questions came that their budget, their organizational budget is broken out by month. Are you going to want that budget, the monthly budget, or an annual total by category?
I think an annual budget one way or the other. I mean, if you've got 12 monthly budgets and you want to submit that as one package, that would be fine. But we want to look at your organization's annual operations, whatever your operating year is, whether that's calendar year or July 1st to June 30th or something else.
There's one more question about, there's more questions coming in. Can you clarify the requested amount categories? For instance, if my organization's budget size says that the max amount is $10,000, is that the amount that they should apply for, or any amount
Yes.
up to that?
I put in $10,000.
Okay, great.
We're not making partial awards. We're not going to be trying to determine, who to shave $1,000 from here or there. We're going to give out the maximum awards that we can and the maximum amount that's requested.
Can funds be used for a summer intern that they would have
Yes.
normally hired but couldn't because, okay.
Yes.
And then I think that's it for the main questions. There was one question about getting connected to the online grant portal, but it sounded like you were going to show us that momentarily. Is that correct?
Sure. So let's do that first here. So if you are on our website or in the guidelines, you can click on Connecticut Humanities online grant portal. That will open up a new tab with a URL that has grant interface on it and a log on here. If you don't know if your organization has an account with us, you can email me and we'll let you know. If you don't have one, you can click create new account and have one within minutes here. The only thing that will be something you might need to look up is what your employer identification number is, your EIN number. That is something that we will need here to be able to check on your 501c3 status. Everything else is stuff that you'll know, like your organization's mailing address and phone number. If you know you've got an account but don't remember your password, you can click forgot your password, and the site will generate a new one for you and email it to the email. Your login is always your email address. So that's something to remember here. And if you have any problems, email me and we'll help get it squared away. I do want to show you what the system looks like. When I log in here, it's going to look like my screen, which is a whole different screen than you see. So I'm going to then quickly change to being one of you so you can see what an applicant screen will look like. Let me log out because that was trying to get me. We also have it so that when you log in, it will go directly, if you log in from the CARES Act, it will go directly to our application for you. And I can't apply because I am a grants administrator. So I am going to log in. And I saw, let's see here. I saw Sandy Stabner from Blue Slope. So let's look at Blue Slope here as an example. And the contact is Sandy Stabner. So Sandy, I'm logging as you, and I hope you and Sandy don't mind. When you log in, you have an applicant dashboard. That dashboard has your contact information at the top. It'll have whatever active requests that you've got going. It looks like Blue Slope has started a CARES Act grant with us, and any historical requests that have been done with that email address. If you have colleagues that have applied with other email addresses, it will not show up here under historical requests, because again, this is historical requests for your email address login for your account. And you can have multiple people associated with an account from your organization. There's an apply tab, and that's where you can find our 2 grant lines that are still open, the Relief Act grants we've been talking about, and the quick grants, which we've not started to talk about yet. Start an application by clicking the blue apply button. When you do so, it will kick over to the application side of that PDF I was showing you earlier with all the questions, with check boxes narrative fields, place to upload your organization's budget. You can click save as you go through the application. It will auto save every few minutes on you, but if you want to force save, you can force it to save periodically. When you're all ready, hit the blue submit button, and it will not let you hit the blue submit button until all of the required fields have been completed. If you have an organization history with us, with other grants going back from other people, this is where at the organization history at the top, you'll have a request history, and you'll see all of the grants, not just the ones that you started, but that your colleagues before you started. And if you start a second account for your organization, that is not a problem. I will merge them so that your new records will go with your old records. But if you have any questions, you can just let me know. All right. Should we quickly go over to quick grants here?
Sure. Does anyone have any follow-up questions about the CARES funds? I'm not seeing anything in the chat, so.
Okay. If you go under our work, you'll see the drop down not only for CARES Act, which we've been talking about, but quick grants. Many of you know these. We've had these going now for about 7 or 8 years. Ordinarily, these are to fund small exhibits, public programs, tours of your community, small communities programs up to $4,999 of support. For the June 5th deadline, and although it's not on our website yet, but we'll be updating it in the coming days, for the July and August deadlines, which we'll be announcing as well, we're gonna have 3 back-to-back deadlines, June, July, and August. We will be only looking for projects that will help organizations do projects to serve their community's needs during the COVID pandemic. So these are things like, you can click on for more information, helping you move an organization's existing programs or exhibits to online and digital, creating distance learning to help teachers and students for summer camp programs with good humanities content, create mobile tours or physical tours. If you are not able to open your historic house, but you have grounds that you want to do outside exhibit and signage on, to help people that can walk the grounds but can't go inside, to display content in places where community members can access it. That would fall into that line. Or I know there's some organizations that are working with vacant storefronts. I've got 2 of those organizations I'm talking with right now, and putting displays on in windows that people can walk by on Main Street. Doing oral history or collecting projects to be able to record this moment in your community's history for future use. The max is the same of $4,999. We still require a minimum 1-to-1 match, but now up to 100% of the grant funds, which is new for quick grants, can be used for staff salary. So if this is taking your exhibit and putting it online, and all that work is really just paying your curator to do this, you can ask for all $4,999 to be paying for your curator over the next 9 months to transition this and the programming that relates to it to virtual. You are allowed to receive both a CARES Act grant and a quick grant for COVID pivoting of your programs. Those are independent of each other. They do not impact one another. If you have needs in both areas, project-based and relief-based, apply for both, and I know many organizations will. Similar to what we're doing with COVID grants, if we run out of money, but you have an eligible project, we'll carry those June submissions on to July and hopefully be able to fund some more of them come July when our new fiscal year starts and our new state funding kicks in.
There's a quick question, Scott. If declined for the June 5th grant, do you reapply for the July or August dates?
If you'll have one of 3 things that will happen with the June quick grants. You'll either be funded, you'll be declined, in which case there was a problem with your application and it wasn't competitive and it wasn't a matter of us running out of funding. We would let you know what that was and whether there was a chance to resubmit if you answered some things differently or gave more information, or that you're being carried over to the next review. And if that's the case, you do not need to reapply, you do not need to change anything. We'll just carry you over to the next review round.
Okay. And are the quick grants, in the way you've pivoted, also targeting smaller organizations similarly to the CARES Act funds?
They do not have the same priority given to small organizations. It will be priority based on the strength of the humanities projects that you're putting together, regardless of organization size.
Okay, so that's much more focused on the project itself than on the nature of the organization.
That said, we are mindful of what the organization is and their capabilities and their structure. And we are often taking into account those kind of things in capacity and size. And we are making sure that our quick grants do not exclude the mid and small size organizations. And there are a number of places that are on this chat today, I think they can speak to having received quick grants from us over the years that are a very small size organization.
Great. Well, we have about 5 minutes left or so. I'd like to invite anyone who has additional questions to either put them in the chat and I'll ask them of Scott, or we can go back into Brady Bunch mode. And if you want to, please unmute yourself and ask your question if you would like.
And I don't have to leave right at 1. We want to be fair to everyone here, but if people need to hang around for a little bit, we'll probably do a formal end in a few moments here, but allow people to hang on for a few more minutes if they'd like to.
Scott, it's Rosemary Selsbach. Can you hear me?
I can, Rosemary.
I just had one question. If you're with an organization that had planned a fundraiser for October, I noticed that the last date you seem to go out on the CARES grant is September. What about that?
I would note that. That's why we gave some narrative blocks there. I would just put that in there. Give the estimated by September 1st, but note that you've already postponed or canceled your fundraiser for October. And I'm anticipating that we're going to continue to offer these grants for some time. Like I said, with state funds or other funds that we're fortunate to receive from other funders. And we're going to keep moving those deadlines forward. But for right now, we're just trying to track all that information in the first wave of grants by Labor Day.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yep.
Any other organization-specific questions or things you want to quiz Scott about in terms of the funding that they're rolling out?
Scott, this is Cynthia Elliott, James Merrill House.
Hi,
For
Cynthia.
the quick, hi. So for the quick grants that are applications due on June 5th, do you want to have the advance review of the draft as we have in the past?
I will still do those because these are project-based grants. If you can get stuff in, and I've been telling people Memorial Day plus or minus, of course that's coming up hard and fast on us on Monday, but if you can get me stuff earlier next week versus later next week, I know there's going to be a lot of grants coming in and a lot of requests. I will do my best to always review grants in the order that people ask. I kind of do a queue and just keep working my way down. And the earlier you get to that queue, the earlier I'll be able to get you feedback and input on your grant.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. There was a question. Can you restate, Scott, the dates of eligible expenses to qualify?
For the COVID relief grants, the CARES Act grants that we have from the NEH, those $450,000 of relief grants, expenses are eligible going back to March 27th, when the federal legislation was enacted.
Okay.
For the quick grants, those June 5th project-based grants, these will be for activities and expenses starting July 1st going forward. Our quick grants and our normal grants are not retroactive. The CARES Act is a unique thing in that there's some retroactive abilities there.
Okay. And is there, it sounded like it was through September for it they anticipated, or?
For the quick grants can be used for project expenses happening July 1st going forward for 9 months. So July 1st, basically through the end of March of 2021. For the $450,000 of CARES Act grants, it will be for expenses retroactive as early as March 27th, as far forward as 6 months after the award date. So basically through the end of the calendar year is what we're looking.
Great. Yeah, there was another sort of follow-up question regarding equipment. So for the quick grants, in particular, since these are project-based and around pivoting to do things digitally, would new equipment like a laptop, camera, microphone for doing like a live stream lecture be an eligible expense for those? Great.
Yep, those are all eligible. If all you need is technology, apply for software, hardware to be able to do these things. We want to give you the resources to be able to successfully pivot your activities. And I would rather fund you once to buy something than fund you 6 times to rent it, because it'll be a lot cheaper for you to get it once than to rent it 6 times.
I have a question. If you started for the quick grant, if you started gathering information for your COVID-19 pieces before July 1st, can you include any expenses associated, because there's an immediacy that was happening here. Can you include any expenses before July 1st?
Not for the quick grants. For the quick grants, it's got to be your expenses that are going to be happening going forward.
Okay, good. Thank you.
The state, because that's state funding with different rules. Like I said, the retroactivity is a new thing for us, and it's with the allowances and the rules that are coming with the federal legislation.
Thanks.
Great. Well, we just have a couple of minutes left. I just want to thank everyone for being a part of this and for your excellent questions. This was a really wonderful opportunity to, spotlight these new funding opportunities. And hopefully everyone who is here has learned something of use. And I hope that we'll see a lot of applications, that Connecticut Humanities will see a lot of applications from you all as a result of these conversations. So I just want to close things out. I'm going to stop.
I would love it if every single organization on this call puts in a CARES Act relief grant. That would be a good thing for us. It's going to show the demand. It's going to show the need. And hopefully it'll be getting more funding from one way or another, so that we can hopefully get as many organizations that are hurting and eligible and needing funds, the funding that you all need right now. And I'm happy to stay along. I think we'll probably end the recording in a moment here, but I'm happy if Amherst is okay with it staying on for a few more minutes to answer questions, or if people just need to talk to another human face for a little bit. I'm happy to be able to do that too. I know I haven't left my house much over the last 2 months. I don't know about you all.
Yeah, I think that's true. Well, I want to thank Connecticut Humanities for partnering with us. They're really important to the work that the League does, certainly, and we're very grateful for this collaboration. So thank you all for being a part. I'm going to stop recording, and those who want to hang out may certainly do so.